Bond, James Bond. Hi, this is Robert Darby, and you're listening to Cracking the Code of Spy Movies. Stay tuned.
Today, we decode the good and the bad and the unique in the Timothy Dalton James Bond movies. He was part of a dramatic change to the series as he took over the James Bond role from Roger Moore. And interestingly, we're in a similar position today. Hi, this is Dan.
And Tom.
From SpyMovieNavigator.com on our show Cracking the Code of Spy Movies. We're cracking into the gems of spy movies, so let's get to it.
All right, much like we did with last week's episode on Roger Moore and his James Bond movies, we're going to look at Timothy Dalton and both of his James Bond movies.
Yeah.
Now, before we get to the movies, we need to look at where the series was at the time Dalton took over. Roger Moore had just wrapped up a decade of playing James Bond in a lighter style than his predecessors did. Also, unlike when Roger Moore took over as Bond, much of the material from Fleming's novels had already been used.
Yeah.
So what was to be done? I mean, were they going to go back to the roots, go forward with a lighter Bond, or something else? This really caused a dilemma for the writers and Eon Productions. Richard Maybaum and Michael G. Wilson wanted to take things back to James Bond's first mission and go forward from that. They wanted to talk about how Bond became 007. He would start out as a novice agent and earn his stripes. Well, we finally saw that happen, how he earned his stripes in Casino Royale.
In 2006.
Yeah, in 2006.
Yeah.
So similarly, when Casino Royale came out, it was also a changing of the guard of who the actor was to play James Bond. So there are lots of synergies that Eon has had to deal with over the years. And Cubby Broccoli didn't like the idea of going all the way back to a pre-007 Bond.
Mm.
He didn't want to show Bond honing his trade. He wanted to show Bond as a seasoned spy. So they didn't do the first Dalton movie going back to the roots. And you also have to remember they had written the script for The Living Daylights before they had cast Dalton.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see how they're doing that, because now we have the same problem after Craig's gone.
Yeah, I mean, the uncanny thing here is that after No Time to Die, we all know how that ended, we're hearing talk of something like this plot going forward. It probably makes more sense now since they killed the character off in No Time to Die. After A View to a Kill, James Bond was alive and well still. So we must remember that Pierce Brosnan was originally slated to play James Bond following Roger Moore, but his contract again with the TV show Remington Steele made it impossible. So
they had him all lined up. They were taking publicity pictures and everything.
Yeah, he was really disappointed. I know that.
Yeah.
In the book Some Kind of Hero by Matthew Field and A.J. Chowdhury, they have a quote about how hiring Dalton would change how Bond would be written. Richard Maybaum says about Dalton this, quote, "I've been feeling for some time that we've been getting a little too far out. I happen to think that Timothy Dalton gives us a new lease on life. We can go back to the realistic espionage stories rather than the far-out fantasy tales," unquote. So there you have it. It wasn't just Timothy Dalton who wanted the character to change, but the writers did as well.
This was a period of change because Dalton was the last Bond to smoke cigarettes on screen. He never mentions Blofeld or has anything to do with him. No, part of that was because of the lawsuit. We never see him playing Baccarat. He plays Blackjack, though.
Yeah.
And he has Felix Leiter in both of his movies. So Craig had Leiter in 3 of his movies. Moore has him in Live and Let Die. And then and Connery had Leiter in 4 of his 6 Eon production movies.
Yeah.
Now, Brosnan, interestingly, had no appearances of Leiter.
Right,
So Dalton was 100% a Felix Leiter fan.
Yeah, there you go. See, 100% of his movies had Felix. All right, interesting.
Yeah, and one other thing before we get into the plots of these movies, we finally get to see John Barry in a James Bond movie. In The Living Daylights, he was the director you see on screen of the orchestra.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
That really is. So there's a lot of changes afoot with the new direction Eon Productions was taking with Timothy Dalton.
Yeah. All right, let's dive into Timothy Dalton's first movie playing James Bond, The Living Daylights. This was loosely based on a short story by Ian Fleming, which includes a planned escape from Berlin, a beautiful blonde cellist, and James Bond shooting the cellist to wound her. Now, the cellist part...
Wait, he doesn't wound her in the movie.
No, in the Fleming story. Now, the cellist part is one of those inside story kind of things, because Ian Fleming had a half sister named Amaryllis, and she was, of course, a cellist. Hey, I love stuff like that. Now, first, the pre-title sequence needs to be called out as simply fantastic.
Yeah, now we've got a whole episode on this we did 3 years
Yeah.
ago on the pre-title sequence to Living Daylight. So if you want a deeper dive than we can give here, check that one out. That released in July of 2022.
Yeah, good point. That's a good one. All right, now let's look at the key takeaways from the pre-title sequence of The Living Daylights, 1987. The pre-title sequence of The Living Daylights is one of the best Bond pre-titles, and it is the introduction of a new actor to play Bond. So we see Timothy Dalton for the first time playing a very tough, gritty, action-oriented, quick deciding James Bond.
Yeah, absolutely. And so some of the key takeaways here is we see a training mission gone wrong as the setup. I mean, this was a nice twist on a Bond pre-title.
Hadn't seen it before.
Yeah, and it also gave us a slow reveal of Bond, which we like. Now, the sequence takes place during a training exercise and the assault on Gibraltar, where these MI6 agents, including Bond, are conducting a specific training mission. So it's supposed to be a mock assault.
Yeah.
Well, this exercise quickly turns deadly as the real enemy infiltrates the operation and takes action against the MI6 agents.
Yeah. We also get another very dramatic reveal of the new actor playing Bond, which we like. When you see other agents on the mission, you will notice one looks a bit like Moore, another, I think, like Lazenby, and they're kind of setting us up, like, so we can guess who's going to be Bond. Of course, we know Timothy Dalton was announced as Bond, but in the movie it looks cool. So we get a very action-packed reveal as the first Timothy Dalton as Bond. This introduction quickly showcased the serious, no-nonsense approach that Dalton was taking on his Bond persona. Unlike Roger Moore's certainly more lighthearted Bond, Dalton's Bond is far more intense, focused, serious, and lethal.
Well, and the other thing is this is in the pre-title sequence. We're seeing the new James Bond.
Yeah.
Roger Moore didn't appear in the pre-title for his first James Bond movie, Live and Let Die.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah, and when we're introduced to him, it's a very straightforward introduction, right? He answers the door, and then he gets a little help from his magnetic watch.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Moore's James Bond portrayal was much more lighthearted than Timothy Dalton's.
We also see Dalton react to the situation, realizing that there are deadly enemies lurking all around him, and he is in pursuit. His first line, "Hold on," is delivered as he's jumping onto the Jeep, showcasing his physicality and immediately in the movie and his action-oriented, boom, quick-thinking nature.
Well, and a lot of him on that Jeep was really him.
Yeah,
he wanted to do that.
Yeah, he did a lot of stuff. This scene is realistic and it's down and dirty. Bond chases the assassin down the cliffs of Gibraltar. The enemy kills an MI6 agent. Bond realizes what's happening. He jumps onto a runaway Jeep, fighting the assassin while the vehicle is speeding towards the edge of a cliff, and bam! The Jeep explodes upon impact after falling off the cliff, killing the villain, but Bond, of course, parachuted to safety. Yeah, what a start.
This was one of the things they changed, because originally that thing was supposed to go off this cliff and land in the desert, right? And so they did it differently when they actually tried to actually get it done.
Yeah, I like the way they did it. Yeah.
Yeah. Dalton gives us a perfect balance of grit, toughness, willingness to kill. He's focused immediately on this impromptu mission.
Yeah.
Just all in classic Bond style.
Yeah.
I mean, even though the scene is serious, it still keeps a little of the classic Bond charm. The way it ends with him landing on that yacht where that woman who was bored with all the men she had met so far and who was looking for the right man, he just happens to drop in and she offers him a drink.
Literally.
Yep. as she's intrigued with this man parachuting on her yacht. All of a sudden, she's not bored.
Yeah.
His first real Bond moment is taking the drink and casually introducing himself as he's calling MI6.
Who are you?
Bond, James Bond.
Yeah. Cool.
So here we see the suave, cool, and sophisticated side of Bond with only a touch of humor.
Yeah.
He's not 100% serious. There is a little bit there.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, because remember, he was going to have his report in an hour to MI6.
I'll report in an hour.
Won't you join me?
Better make that 2.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Now, the importance of the pre-title also is that it clearly foreshadows the rest of the Living Daylights and what we should expect of Bond. The pre-title sequence establishes that the Living Daylights will be far more grounded than the previous 7 James Bond movies. It introduces the idea that MI6 is vulnerable. Their mock mission got disrupted as one of their own agents is killed right at the start. It could have been Bond.
That would have made for an interesting film.
Yeah. Bond dying in a pre-title sequence. Oh my God.
Well, and not just Bond, the new Bond. Now we're going to have to get another new actor for Bond.
The end. Bond's quick thinking, toughness, and realism are front and center, showing that this isn't Roger Moore's Bond anymore. We have a new sheriff in town. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in this pre-title, we get a Bond who has the skills of a great MI6 agent. He's quick thinking. He's already killed, escaped, landed on a boat which belongs to a beautiful woman who he gets to spend time with. We get that touch of humor with the 2 hours line. I mean, this really is a great pre-title, a great way to introduce a new Bond.
Yeah, you got all of the elements of Bond in the pre-title sequence that we've seen already. That was great. All right, so the bottom line, one of the best Bond openings ever. Great stunt work and practical effects make this a thrilling opening. A great reveal of Timothy Dalton's Bond, serious, intense, and highly skilled, a man of action and quick thinking. And it balances realism with classic Bond charm, keeping both old and new fans happy. Beautiful. We ask all who are listening, what do you think of this pre-title sequence?
Yeah, and like I just said, as a pre-title and an introduction to a new actor playing James Bond, it nails it.
Yeah.
All right, so let's change gears and get away from the pre-title and look at why The Living Daylights is considered a good movie.
Yes.
Then the first, obviously, is Dalton's gritty and realistic Bond. I mean, we highlighted Timothy Dalton's intense, no-nonsense portrayal, which was really a return to the Bond that Ian Fleming originally wrote about. I mean, we know that Timothy Dalton read the books and he was a big Bond fan and liked the Bond character in the books.
Yep.
And so he brought a more emotional depth to the character. Now, part of that is because he was a trained stage actor.
Yes.
He was a Shakespearean type actor.
Mhm.
But he also brought in that Bond wasn't just a charming spy. He was this hardened professional assassin, a blunt instrument of the government.
Yeah. Just like Fleming described Bond.
Yep.
A blunt instrument of the government. Yeah, his serious attitude made the action feel more believable, I think, too, which is great. Now, next, this is a real strong spy thriller plot. The movie features a Cold War era espionage story. We loved it when it's espionage. All the early Bond movies with Sean Connery, espionage stuff. So here it involves a Soviet defector and assassins, arms dealers, betrayal, and lots of required action to resolve all of these issues, with Bond caught in a world of Soviet defectors and assassins. So this is a great setup. The defection of General Koskov and Bond uncovering a weapon smuggling operation made for a solid spy thriller. That is an understandable and a real lifelike plot. Loved it.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I really liked there is the twist they did with Koskov, right? Oh, we've got him. Oh, wait a minute. He's escaping. He's defecting. I thought that was very well done and a really nice twist.
Yeah.
Okay, so another good thing about this movie were some of the action sequences. And we've already mentioned the Gibraltar pre-title opening sequence.
Mm-hmm.
And Dan, I think you said it was one of the best pre-title sequences ever. But there are some other great action sequences.
Yeah. I mean, let's not forget the Aston Martin V8 chase. That's a classic Bond car chase in the snow with the Aston Martin loaded with gadgets. It's great to see. And the V8 was a nice change of pace. So we were kind of like that.
And we also got to see a great use of a laser, even if it was highly unlikely how they used it.
Yeah.
I love my lasers.
And that cargo plane fight, wow, that was good. That was a dramatic midair fight over Afghanistan where Bond and Nikros, one of my favorite Bond villains, where they battled it out while hanging out of a plane. That was a terrific sequence.
Oh, that was an awesome scene. I mean, that was just, you're watching that going like, ooh, I wouldn't be up there doing that.
Yeah. What a first movie for Dalton.
Yeah.
As Bond. Wow.
Now, another thing we get that's a positive here is there's kind of a different kind of Bond girl in Cara Milovy.
Hmm.
I mean, Miriam Dabo isn't just beautiful. She's a cellist who got caught up in an international conspiracy. She's innocent and vulnerable, and that adds more emotion to her relationship with Bond, at least more than we've historically seen.
Yeah, unlike some past Bond girls, she actually helps Bond instead of just being rescued. We will see that again in License to Kill, Dalton's second outing as Bond. All right. And of course, we have Nikros. We mentioned Nikros. Nikros,
Oh, yeah.
Andreas Wisniewski. He's a deadly assassin using headphone wires as a garrote for a kill and just an overall badass enemy killer who must be dealt with. We got to see the filming locations from the movie where he kills the milkman, takes his vehicle, and heads to Bladen's safe house. We saw the safe house too. That was cool.
That was Stoner Park. What a beautiful property.
Yes.
And one thing I like about this Necros character is that the way they use the milk bottles as explosive devices. I just thought was a really cool twist to that too. I like it when they do stuff that it's like, wait, where'd that come from?
Yeah, and they actually used Stoner House, this beautiful old mansion, to blow out the windows. They had to change all the historic windows first, though, when they blew them out. But they did blow them out. Anyway, Nikros is intimidating, relentless, and has great fight scenes, especially the kitchen attack and the plane fight. One of our favorites in all of the Bond movies. He is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Just one of those henchman guys that I just really, really like.
Yeah, and there's also a pretty good Bond theme song. The Living Daylights by Aha is a catchy, stylish 80s tune a lot of people have liked.
Well, okay, I'm not one of them.
Yeah,
I wouldn't call that song a positive.
I'm not a huge fan of it either, but a lot of people loved it. All right.
Well, what one thing is when they did that, they try to keep contemporary with a lot of stuff in the James Bond movies. And Aha was actually fairly big at that time. And
I said Aha. Is it Aha?
I don't know whether it's Aha or Aha because I haven't really been a fan of theirs.
Me
But
neither.
at the time they did this, they actually went to a concert and was like, okay, is this what we want to do? The kids were going crazy that were at the concert, so they decided to go ahead and go forward with them.
All right.
Now, again, I don't call that a positive. So, Dan,
Okay.
let's get into some of the negatives of The Living Daylights.
Yeah. There are some critics too, of course.
Yeah, and I think we have to start with the weak main villains. You've heard me talk in the past about how a James Bond movie is best when there's a strong villain. Now, we don't really get one here. We get a villain that's fun to watch, but I wouldn't call him a strong villain. We love Necros as a henchman, but come on. These guys were not exactly the strongest Bond villains ever. I mean, we get General Koskov, Jérôme Krabbe. I mean, he's more of a non-serious kind of villain, more than some ominous threat kind of villain that we've historically seen. He was acted well, but the character development on him, it wasn't my style for a villain.
Yeah. We get Brad Whitaker, Joe Don Baker. He's an interesting character. He's an arms dealer who's obsessed with war and is kind of a nut. Maybe he's a bit underdeveloped, I think, as a character, which makes his persona a little bit awkward. But overall, I thought he was a decent nutcase kind of guy in the movie.
Well, the mansion they used, I think it was Malcolm Forbes' mansion. And Malcolm Forbes used to play with toys like that.
Oh.
So that was kind of an interesting twist there. But neither of these guys are like a Blofeld, Goldfinger, Largo, Sanchez, or even a Drax.
No.
I mean, a James Bond movie needs a strong villain. And I'm not quite sure we got one here in The Living Daylights.
Yeah, that kind of stuff doesn't bother me all that much, really. I like more realistic enemies and villains than the ones that want to start new races in space and stuff. Anyway,
I have a feeling you're going to talk about that when we talk about the next movie.
Yeah, another negative is that some did not like the less charismatic, less amusing, fewer one-liners kind of Bond. But
well, that's just because of Moore.
Yeah.
I mean, the Moore fans that's what they want Bond to be.
Yeah, so Dalton with his serious approach, people think he had a lack of charm, lack of humor, and fans, they didn't love that. They liked more of the Connery Moore performances. I don't know. Personally, I think Connery had the perfect blend of all of that, actually. He was good with all of that. Moore was a little over the top with the funnier stuff. Now,
well, like we said, Maybaum was saying, they had kind of taken Moore out there a little too far.
Yeah.
And Moore was willing. I mean, he was a good comedic actor, so he's willing to take that way.
Yeah, but Dalton is certainly more reserved as Bond, and some viewers found this too cold, too much lacking personality, and also missing an element that fans had become accustomed to in Bond. Okay, all right. I could see the criticism.
They became accustomed to him with Moore, but well, Connery showed a sense of humor. Moore's portrayal took things very lighthearted.
Yeah, yeah.
And I love that Dalton took James Bond back to the Bond and Fleming's novels.
Yeah, if he
I mean,
would,
he took it back to the books where Connery's Bond was the books, but this humor stuff was a lot more there than where it was in the books.
yeah, if he would have kept it lighthearted, we would have never gotten Daniel Craig's version of Bond, because this really set it up way ahead of time.
Well,
but
I'm
it
not
set
sure
it
that
up.
might have been a good thing if we didn't get the Daniel Craig's Bond.
The seriousness part I'm talking about. All right.
Yeah, but the thing too, though, is the way they wrote this character and the way that Dalton acted it. Seriously, I just think they'd gone too far. They brought it back. They didn't go back to the beginning. And we also have to remember this movie was written before Dalton was hired on.
Yeah.
So they had to tweak it for that. And originally it was written for Brosnan, and it was supposed to be lighter, a little bit lighter.
Yeah. All right. Our third negative is slow pacing in some parts. What?
Wait, Dan, people complain about pacing in a movie. I think we say that every
A
one of these
pacing
things.
issue.
I mean, this is the first movie ever that we've talked about that's had pacing issues.
All right.
right?
Yeah. The Living Daylights is more focused on espionage and drama than the big action scenes and dramatic set pieces that we have seen and grown accustomed to in other Bond movies. That's certainly true. Did the movie drag a bit? I don't know. Maybe in the middle sections a little, with Kara's romantic subplot and maybe the Afghanistan resistance subplot. But again, the Kara thing developed her character, I think, a little bit more. So I didn't mind that.
Well, and the Afghanistan resistance gave us that flight,
Yeah.
right? And we wouldn't have gotten that scene.
Yeah.
And it gave us the jail scene, which it lightened the movie up a bit.
Yeah.
We also didn't get many of the classic Bond tropes. I mean, they just were missing in action. There were far fewer gadgets than we'd recently seen. I mean, aside from the Aston Martin, there weren't many Bond gadgets, but I guess the Phillips whistle bomb thing was pretty good.
Yeah, that was cool.
And the impromptu cello case as a sled is one of my favorite gadgets in the movie. I just like how they took such an ordinary, mundane object and turned it into a gadget.
Yeah.
But other than those two, what gadgets were there? I mean, mundane things like binoculars and bulletproof vests. Ooh.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
now-
Big deal.
The fact that there weren't that many gadgets in either of the Dalton movies is one of the reasons why when we did our gadgets episode on Dalton, we actually combined it into one episode. There just weren't enough of them in either movie,
Right.
especially The Living Daylights.
Yeah. And you talk about the cello case as a sled. We talked to Chris Corball, who was the special effects guy for a lot of the Bond movies, and he talks about this particular cello case as a sled. So listen to that episode. He's terrific. All right. And as we alluded to in our comments on Timothy Dalton's James Bond being more serious, there are no iconic Bond one-liners, really. Dalton's Bond doesn't really rely on quips and humor, making the movie feel certainly more serious. So the bottom line is, The Living Daylights is a solid but underrated Bond movie. If you love classic spy thrillers, then you'll appreciate The Living Daylights. If you want to,
It's a spy movie.
it's a spy movie. Yeah. If you want a serious, realistic Bond, then Dalton's performance is going to be a standout for you. If you prefer over-the-top Bond action, this one may feel a little bit restrained. There are some good action sequences, though, so it's not devoid of them. So you'll be entertained.
Yeah, I agree. Living Daylights is a strong debut for Dalton. Took things a little different direction, but I thought it was really good. So how would you, our listeners, rank this movie against the James Bond catalog?
Yeah.
Is it in your top 10? Your top 20? Your bottom 5? Right? No, whatever. All right. Now, before we move on, there's one more story I want to talk about that I just love about The Living Daylights. And why I like it is because it talks a lot about the inner workings of a Bond production. Jerome Krabbe wanted to make a pasta dinner one night for everybody. They'd been in Morocco for like a month or something like that.
Mhm.
And they were getting tired of couscous. So he wanted to make this pasta dinner. Well, they didn't have the ingredients there out in the desert. What happens? Barbara Broccoli had the ingredients flown in so he could make the meal.
That's kind of nice.
And somehow, I don't see the folks at Amazon doing something like that. Things are going to change.
Yeah. All right. I think that's a good look at Timothy Dalton's first turn in a Bond movie. So now let's take a look at License to Kill, his second and final Bond movie. But first, there's a couple of shout outs to our listeners who gave us some feedback on our podcast episodes. On our James Bond Women Die or Survive episode, hey, Jim Phelps said, hey, good review in your spy class today. Thank you. Glad you can keep track of all that. All right.
Actually, I had to create a spreadsheet to do that one.
In our The Good, Bad, and the Unique of Roger Moore's Bond movies, Jim Phelps again said, hey, nice job, gentlemen. Good Sir Roger review. And Christian Siebman said, amazing episode. Thanks. We appreciate you giving us feedback. Keep it up. Keep it coming.
Yeah, keep it up. We love getting that feedback.
All right, let's get to A License to Kill.
So, unlike The Living Daylights, which was written before Dalton was cast, and adjustments had to be made after the casting, License to Kill was written knowing that Dalton would be playing Bond.
Yeah.
They knew how Dalton wanted to play the role, and we think Dalton looks more natural in this one than in The Living Daylights. And I think part of it was because it was written for him.
Yeah.
Also, License to Kill was filmed in Florida and in the USA, and Churubusco Studios in Mexico City was used as the studio instead of Pinewood Studios. There was some scheduling conflict.
Mm. Yeah.
It also, by making that move, it saved a lot of production costs because they did it in Mexico instead of in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
Although many of the cast and crew had health issues with the elevation of Mexico City and the pollution of Mexico City at the time.
Yeah.
So this is a big change.
Yeah. In our conversation with Robert Davi, of course, who played Franz Sanchez in this movie, he was telling us about some of this as well. All right, we'll start with a lot of the positives because there are plenty of them in this great Bond movie. Again, Timothy Dalton's back, a darker, more serious Bond, ahead of his time again, maybe in the sense that viewers were not prepared yet after the Roger Moore Bond, but were more accepting with Daniel Craig by the time he came around to be serious as Bond. But License to Kill was the darkest Bond movie up to this point, with a gritty, very violent, and personal storyline, as Bond is on a vendetta. Of course, we know that. Some of its scenes caused problems with the British censors. Think of the Felix Leiter maiming scene. This meant that the movie got a 15 rating in the UK, which is close to an R rating here in the US. Now, you look back, and this Bond movie and Dalton's first Bond movie did 191.2 million and 156.2 million, respectively. These are unadjusted numbers. So we said maybe people were not ready for this serious Bond.
When they released this, there was a lot of competition out than in some of the earlier releases.
All right, but Dalton's version of Bond was closer to Daniel Craig's Bond in Casino Royale 2006 and Skyfall 2012, which grossed 606 million and 1.1 billion, respectively. So maybe Dalton was ahead of his time in a lot more ways than one.
He was a trailblazer.
Yeah. So Dalton's Bond is cold, ruthless, and full of anger, making him one of the most realistic portrayals of this character.
Now, another positive of License to Kill is, well, Bond goes rogue.
Oh, a rogue Bond.
Now, making it at the time a unique story. Yes, we do have the movie that we just reviewed called Hopscotch that came out 9 years earlier. And in that one, Kendig goes rogue.
Mm-hmm.
But here in License to Kill, this is rogue for revenge against attacks on his friends.
All right, this plot is personal as Bond is on a personal mission to make right the maiming of his friend Felix Leiter and the killing of Felix Leiter's wife. So, very unlike the typical save the world Bond missions. So Franz Sanchez and his henchmen are responsible for all of this, and Bond is out to get them.
You have to love Sanchez.
Yeah, we'll get them in a minute. He was a great villain. I love him as a villain.
Yeah, now, as you kind of alluded to, this is one of the only Bond movies where 007 is acting completely outside of MI6.
That's true.
So he's changing up the usual formula. We've seen him do something like this in some of the earlier movies, but only superficially.
Mhm.
Here, Revenge and his to heck with MI6 actions were new and exciting. We hadn't seen it to this level before. And we've since seen agents go rogue in many spy movies, but this was a big step for the Bond franchise.
Yeah. And now, of course, we have one of the best Bond villains ever, Franz Sanchez. Franz Sanchez, Robert Davi, is one of the most chilling and realistic Bond villains while being likable at the same time. He may be our favorite Bond villain overall for his realism and great portrayal. And Robert Davi was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and there's a lot we can talk about Davi here, but he spent over an hour with us on a podcast episode
Oh, yeah.
where we interviewed him, and he had some great stories to tell about filming License to Kill. So be sure to tune into that one because there's great stories where he's talking about some of the inner workings of this and some of the jokes people were playing on each other. I mean, we're not going to recant them here.
Yeah.
Listen to that episode if you want to hear that.
Yeah.
But Davi did a great job explaining that for us.
Yeah, and he's real because he's not a megalomaniac trying to take over the world or build a new race of humans. He's a cold, calculating drug lord who operates through loyalty and fear and wants to continue running his drug empire. It's pretty simple, yet intriguing. Real. I like it.
Yeah, and I think the combination of Robert Davi's performance, which was stellar,
Yes.
and the fact that he's this normal person, albeit seemingly with no morals,
Yeah.
it makes Sanchez stand out as a Bond villain. I mean, if you think about Goldfinger or maybe Elliot Carver a few years after License to Kill, they were both seemingly normal people, but there's something that differentiates them and Sanchez, and I think it starts with Sanchez's whipping of Lupe here.
Yeah.
This was new. It set us up for Sanchez's ruthlessness, and he's willing to get his hands dirty.
Yeah, that was a rough scene. I remember it was kind of, and he talks about that too in our conversation with him. So check that out. Another positive differentiator is that Bond wins over Sanchez's trust for a while, and so this is atypical of Bond villains from previous missions. This adds more tension to the story, which is,
That's a good point.
yeah. So
Okay. So another positive here. License to Kill was probably the most violent James Bond movie versus the episodes that had preceded it.
yeah,
I mean, this thing was brutal. There was hard-hitting action scenes. I mean, yikes. And some of that
Yes.
stuff was just like, whoa.
yeah,
Now, License to Kill has some of the most intense and violent action scenes in Bond history. And that's one of the reasons why it got a 15 rating in the UK.
yeah.
It broke the mold in several ways, starting with Felix Leiter's shark attack. Sanchez fed Felix to a shark, which is one of the most brutal moments in the series.
Yeah.
It was intense and actually a little tough to watch.
Yeah, that took a major leap forward in viciousness on the screen. And then you had the bar brawl, which was kind of just a bar fight, but it was a big bar fight. Bond fights multiple enemies without gadgets, showing his raw combat skills, which was a highlight of the bar brawl and so on.
Yeah, he does get help from Pam Bouvier, and she was also a highlight.
Yeah, she helps him often in this movie, which is good. All right, remember the CIA agent on the take who took $2 million from Sanchez to help him escape?
You mean Killifer?
Yeah, Killifer. Bond and Sharky let him get eaten to death by the sharks that mauled Leiter. So kind of they got their revenge. It was brutal. That was even more brutal than the Leiter scene. Whew. And then we end with the final tanker chase. One of the best Bond finales with an explosive high-speed chase involving oil tankers. This again is a first, a chase with tanker trucks. Cool.
It really was good. And I read somewhere that somebody had been working on that, thinking of making, that type of a chase be a pre-title sequence in a Bond movie. And it ended up fitting very well here as a final chase.
Yeah.
Right. Now, this one isn't as intense as that chase, but that whole helicopter ensnaring Sanchez's Cessna plane in that pre-title sequence.
Yeah, we're going fishing. Yeah.
That, to me, was a great, memorable stunt that Corky Fornoff developed. I thought that was a really cool way to open that movie.
Yeah.
Now, we also have, because of that, we get Bond and Leiter parachuting into the wedding.
Yeah, that was cool.
Which we saw something similar in the In-Laws.
Yes.
And we talked about that in our episode on that.
Yes.
So it's kind of interesting how this stuff all kind of ties together.
Yeah. Now, when you look at Bond, again, Timothy Dalton here in his second outing as James Bond, you have to think that this exchange between Sanchez and Bond really sums up what this James Bond is all about.
In my business, you prepare for the unexpected.
And what business is that?
I help people with problems.
Problem solver.
I'm more of a problem eliminator.
Yeah, I think that does do a good job, Dan.
All right. So, wow, that pretty much does it. All right.
Right. Another positive in License to Kill are the strong Bond girls. You've got Pam Bouvier and Lupe Lamora. Pam Bouvier, played by Carrie Lowell, is one of the strongest Bond girls in the whole series.
Mm-hmm.
She's tough. She's an independent ex-CIA agent who helps Bond, and she saves him several times, as you mentioned, Dan.
Yeah.
She's one of the toughest Bond girls. She can handle herself well. And when she unzipped that dress, wow.
Yeah.
And she hated that dress.
Carrie Lowell.
That thing was heavy. And at one point the zipper got stuck on her skin and they had to cut it off. I mean, she did not like that dress, but that dress
In real life,
was
you're
actually
talking about.
in real life.
Yeah, I'll film it.
But
Okay.
but that dress,
Yeah.
Carrie Lowell
Yeah.
didn't like the dress.
Yeah.
But that dress, I think, was the one that Talisa Soto used in her audition.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Now, Lupe Lamore, to Lisa Soto, mentioned Sanchez's girlfriend. She adds emotional depth to the movie as she's trapped in this abusive relationship. Now, some criticize her acting here, but you got to remember that she is in an abusive relationship with Sanchez and is fearful all the time of him. I think Talisa Soto played that fearfulness very well. It came out in her actions and her eyes. And for the movie, really, Talisa Soto went to a blackjack dealer school in Vegas to help handle her scenes in the casino when she's dealing blackjack. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, you got to like it when they go and do that type of work.
Yeah. All right.
Now, we also get one of my favorite henchmen in a James Bond movie, played Dario,
Yeah,
played
Dario.
by Benicio del Toro. I mean, we talked about how we like Necros in The Living Daylights, but Dario to me is a better role.
Frightening.
His interactions with Sanchez are fantastic.
Yes.
He was a relatively new actor,
Yes.
but it's something we hadn't really seen since Oddjob and Goldfinger, or maybe you could say Gabinda and Octopussy,
Mhm.
but it was similar. But it's rare in a Bond series to have the henchman have a strong relationship with his boss.
Yeah,
the
yeah,
villain.
yeah. It was great. And that whole scene after they kill Della, Felix Leiter's wife, and he says,
We gave her a nice honeymoon.
oh, that was an ad lib. And they left it in because they thought that was great. His dragging out the honeymoon part. And Dobby speaks so highly of Benicio. He really loved the guy.
Yeah, there's almost like a father-son relationship there.
Yeah.
In real life.
Yeah. The last positive we'll talk about here are the great practical effects and less reliance on gadgets.
Wait a minute. We just talked about in The Living Daylights how the lack of gadgets was a negative.
Yeah. Well, I
But
don't,
here you're talking about it as a positive.
I don't know if it's a negative or a positive. I think it's a positive in these movies because it works. That's the thing. In this particular movie, especially License to Kill, it really works. But here, I think that we've gotten in the way. Instead of relying on over-the-top gadgets, Bond mostly uses his own skills, his intelligence, making the action more grounded and more real, I think.
And also some help from Pam Bouvier.
Yeah, well, she helped a lot. Now, the tanker chase scene we mentioned was done with real trucks performing insane stunts, making it one of the most impressive chase sequences in Bond history. It is a great example of practical stunts as opposed to green screen, rear projection, or other non-practical devices. It was excellently done.
Yeah, and we got to see one of the cabs of one of those trucks again at the Ian Fleming Foundation because they own it.
Yeah.
So it's going to be neat to see how they revitalize that truck.
All right.
Now, we said there weren't that many gadgets, but there were a couple. Q shows up with that case with those gadgets.
Yeah.
And then we also get Q raking with a gadget.
Yeah. And the funny part of him raking with the gadget, what does he do when he's finished raking with the gadget? It's kind of a communication device, so he could say, hey, they're coming. He throws it out. when he tells Bond every series, right? Bring back these things in one piece. I thought that was like a secret little hint there. That's like, hey, come on, this is funny, folks.
Yes, it really was.
Yeah,
It's
that's
kind of
good.
like, take care of my gadgets. I'm just going to throw this one to the side of the road.
That was it. That was perfect. All right. Now, of course, people do think there are some negatives in this movie. I don't know. Okay. Some think that License to Kill falls short in a few areas. To me, I don't know. It's one of the top 5 or 10 Bond movies ever. Now, the first that they criticize is that it's too dark and violent for some Bond fans. Okay. The movie's gritty tone, for some, was too much. And they were used to the fun and stylish kind of Bond of the past, specifically with Moore. Yeah, here we got people fed to sharks, being burned to death, ground up in stone grinders. Yeah, okay. A guy exploding in a pressure chamber. Ooh, yeah, it's violent, which pushed the PG rating, as we mentioned, to its limits.
Yeah, it got a PG-13 here in the US.
Yeah.
But it got the 15 in the UK.
Yeah.
But that pressure chamber scene. So to me, the pressure chamber scene and the lighter maiming.
Yeah.
Those were both tough watches.
Well, there were a bunch of tough watches in that. And of course, you got the guy getting eaten by maggots too. So forgot about that one. All right.
Yeah, really. that one didn't bother me as much. Right now, another negative, if you will, of License to Kill that some people have is that it deviates from the classic Bond formula.
It does.
Bond fans had been accustomed to and liked the Bond formula since Goldfinger.
Yep.
But here we have no MI6 headquarters because it wasn't filmed in Pinewood, and very few Q branch gadgets, although Q does help Bond in the field, or no world domination theme of any sort. But I guess, I don't know, Sanchez wanted to dominate the world drug market. But this movie was definitely different from the formula.
I don't know if he wanted to dominate the whole drug world market, but he certainly wanted his own little kingdom to be intact. And which I appreciated. Like, okay, you could do that and want that. No, not that it's good, but I'm saying,
yeah, it's a highly prized thing, Dan. Go for it.
He was focused. I want my little thing. Hey, I'm a drug lord. Let me be a drug lord. All right. There were not many glamorous locations either. Most of the movie takes place in a fictional Latin America country, which lacks the exotic feel of classic Bond movies, maybe. But we have a lot of the movie taking place in the Florida Keys, which was pretty cool. We visited all of the filming locations in the Florida Keys, and there are a lot of them. And we have videos out on our YouTube channel and podcasts out on that as well. So, were there all the great glamorous locations like Sardinia, Italy, and all that? No, but the Florida Keys was pretty cool. And
the Florida Keys were pretty cool, but I also think Arabesque, which was Francis's place, that was gorgeous. Yeah. Where they did that truck scene, the truck chase, was a really interesting filming location.
Yeah, especially since there's ghosty things going on there. They said, real spooky stuff. But in real life,
and that whole Omnitech place was a really cool location, and that was a place that does exist. Yeah. So I'm not sure that I would say there were not many great glamorous locations, but I thought there were some pretty cool locations they used. Now, another negative for License to Kill is its weak box office performance. It underperformed at the box office, still made money, partly due to the fact that there was poor marketing and lack of promotion. The new Bond returning for his second outing after what was considered a lackluster box office for The Living Daylights hurt this movie.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it, too. If you didn't like Timothy Dalton in The Living Daylights, you were less inclined to go see License to Kill. And so that had an effect, for sure. And you got to remember, License to Kill was released in 1989 against major movies like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Batman, and Lethal Weapon 2. So it's pretty tough competition and lots of noise in the movie world. Yeah. So, yeah, you got to fight all that.
Yeah, and I think the darker tone alienated some casual Bond fans.
Yeah, again, you didn't like him in The Living Daylights, you might not like him here. All right.
And I think the fact that Timothy Dalton left before a third movie hurt Dalton's long-term legacy. Not necessarily this movie in general, but it may have hurt his legacy.
Yes.
Many fans wanted to see him return for a third Bond film, but there were the legal issues between Barbara Broccoli suing MGM. By the time the legal battles were over, Dalton thought it was too late for a third run as Bond, although they had written a movie for him. And I wish Daniel Craig and Roger Moore had that same thought before they did their last films as James Bond. I think both of them stayed on one movie too long.
Yeah. But so here you say, when people wanted them back, it wasn't great box office performances and so on by either movie, but they wanted him back for a third movie. I think he had done another movie or two, people would be talking about Timothy Dalton as the Bond because he was so good at the role. And again, if you didn't like him in The Living Daylights, you couldn't latch on to his type of Bond, but people did want to see him do another movie. I would have loved if he did one or two more movies. Timothy Bond's take on Bond.
Bond's take on Bond.
Timothy Dalton's take on Bond is now considered underrated, but at the time it was divisive. His two Bond movies are now well accepted, and many fans now like Dalton as Bond. At the time, not so much. Now they do.
Well, it's kind of like George Lazenby's on Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Yeah.
I think the shock of the change of actor and the tone that happens with that turn people off at the beginning. And it takes some time before you go, you know what? This was really good.
Yeah. So the bottom line is here, License to Kill is a great movie. It's divisive in a lot of ways. It is out there with the violence. But if you love dark, gritty action thrillers, hey, License to Kill is one of the best Bond movies ever. If you prefer realistic, serious Bond movies, then Dalton's performance is excellent, as is Robert Davi's as Sanchez and Benicio del Toro as Dario. Wow.
Yeah, but if you want a classic, fun Bond adventure like we got used to with Moore,
yeah.
This one's going to feel over the top, too grim and different, and you may not like it.
Yeah, overall, License to Kill is a brutal, revenge-driven Bond movie that was ahead of its time in multiple ways, but it wasn't fully appreciated until later years. All right.
Yeah, now, Dan, you just said you would have liked to have seen Dalton return for a third movie playing Bond.
Yeah.
Okay, listeners, let us know. Would you have liked to have seen him do that, or were you glad they switched over to Pierce Brosnan?
Yeah. Well, we like Timothy Dalton as Bond, obviously. He's gritty, serious, and good in action sequences from car chases to brutal hand-to-hand fighting. And we think his Shakespearean background made his performance more nuanced and certainly emotionally driven. His facial expressions were among the best of any Bond actor. He said a lot with his face. Think of when he pops the balloon after Saunders is killed in The Living Daylights.
And that was a great sequence of acting because it wasn't just when he pops that balloon after seeing the body. I mean,
that's an example. Yeah.
He appears rattled for a bit after finding Saunders, trying to figure out what's happening.
Yeah.
I thought it was excellent acting there, and it really showed the confusion as he's trying to figure out what was going on.
Yeah, he's not your typical Bond. He was still charming in his way, and also he was conflicted. He was dangerous and sometimes vulnerable, as we saw Pam Bouvier in License to Kill saves him a whole bunch of times. His serious, intense take on Bond made it easy for Daniel Craig's Bond in Casino Royale to exist, because we were ready as Bond fans. We've seen it before, and now we're seeing it in Craig. And people loved Craig's take on this thing, right? You didn't so much, but...
Well, I did in Casino Royale. I really liked it.
Casino Royale is one of the top 5 Bond movies ever. Fantastic. All right, so that's our take on Timothy Dalton's James Bond movies. Let us know what you think. That's a wrap. This has been Dan.
And Tom.
Of SpyMovieNavigator.com and our podcast show, Cracking the Code of Spy Movies. Do us a favor and tell a friend about our show. And subscribe. That helps us a lot, and it's free. Thanks. We do appreciate you spending time with us.